Hello to you all. We are going to talk about this issue, governing without worrying about money. And I was traveling here, I was thinking about this title, and I kept thinking, worrying about money, well, true, Friedrich Merz doesn't have those worries, not even privately. And second, these two parties, the Social Democrats and the Conservatives, are governing in a society that does have a lot of worries about money. To just talk about the things that Ricarda talked about, we only have 4 more years, and these will be critical. So now, to finally be able to spend money and govern with money, which the previous coalition was not able to do. Who was this finance minister from the Liberal Party that had something against spending money? Is that the one that is running over dogs? Oh, you're not allowed to say that. Anyway, this headline, the German parliament agrees to the financial package. Could you imagine or have bet money a few years ago on Friedrich Merz granting himself 500 billion through a package and reforming the debt brake? I don't see many hands. I wouldn't have shown up. I wouldn't have bet a single D-mark or euro on this, but it really happened. And this is what I'm going to talk to you about, what that actually is, how we got there, where the money actually is coming from, and most importantly, what we can learn from this, because you have to say, well, there can be a certain euphoria about having a government that's able to spend money, and Germany doesn't need this, but it's not like Friedrich Merz having kind of withdrawn over the winter and having sat at home and wondering, is our financial system working? Is it clever to just have austerity politics all the time? And then, in a quiet moment, having realized, well, actually, it would be much more reasonable if Germany had a modern infrastructure, especially with an aging society that will have much more pensioners to look after when there'll be fewer people in employment, and then having to solve the climate issues. So that was not what happened. None of this. This reform, this financial package, was born from emergency. And I would claim it was Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump who became the ultimate opponents of the debt brake, and not reason, not a new thinking about the way our financial system works, how modern financial politics might work, not about climate protection, and finally getting this solved, or this ridiculous infrastructure that we have. All these things were not this. This all came from an emergency. Donald Trump spreading rumors whether the U.S. would remain serious about NATO, calling for a 5% share for defense spending. Vladimir Putin, who keeps bombing Ukraine, that is the reason. So from that emergency, it's not a progressive momentum with a motto, oh, the better arguments have won the day. So that you have to keep in mind to have a realistic assessment of how we actually got here. Still, there's quite a lot you can do with this. How much money is there? 500 billion, I'll put it short. This has been known for a time. 500 billion, kind of a special fund for a few years, 100 for the German states and the municipalities, plus X, and that is the reform of the debt brake. So state spending above a certain threshold for security are exempted from the debt brake, thank God. And praise to the Greens, I have to say. Security, thanks to the Greens for defining security more broadly. We're not at the forefront of climate protection spending, even though we like to claim that sometimes. And the least thing is at least to have disaster protection, population protection at the forefront. For years, the Red Cross has called for 200 billion being spent against disasters. These 200 billion we haven't even managed to spend during COVID. It was about 80 million. And why? The debt brake was always in the way, because more money for disaster protection means less money for something else. And that now finally has been resolved, not just more money for defense spending for the army, but also for protecting the population. The economic experts have already complained the rules that are in place for this 500 million plus X can now lead to it being a shuffling around of funds, nothing more. So things might be used from the climate protection fund to reduce energy prices, nothing progressive, or to make investments in regular budgets less, moving them into this special fund, and then have subsidies for fuel in agriculture or commuters. Now, solving all this with new rules, I think we will do good to use the rules that we have and expect the governments not to do this. And even if there is this shuffling around of funds, at least there will be more money around than there has been before. So in my view, this, I think, would not, this will be, the opposition parties will, of course, take a look, and that's good, but this is not the best way of criticizing the whole issue, because it still is a good thing that we have this. An important question, though, is 500 billion plus X, where does it actually come from? Because for years and years, we were told that the state can only spend what it has earned before. In the version of the FDP, the Liberal Party, you can only distribute what you have earned, what you have through the economy before that. And the question, of course, is now who has actually earned these 500 billion or created them? So what was this thing that Friedrich Merz thought of in the short time? So the short form is this money comes from the European Central Bank, the creators of the euro. They are pressing a key on their computer, and then these 500 billion will get to Lars Klingbein, the new finance minister. That is the very reduced, simplified version. But I'll give you the complicated version too. The complicated version isn't Lars Klingbein sells state debts, state bonds. This is more or less an auction, but not everyone is allowed to take part. Only selected banks, 32 in fact. These, the highest bidder wins, just as in eBay. And the highest bidding bank will now buy the state bond, and if it can transfer the money to Lars Klingbeil. So whatever bank, German bank or Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan will have to transfer, say, 10 billion to Lars Klingbeil. Now, where do these 10 billion come from? These are not funds that the bank takes from your granny's savings account and transfers to Lars Klingbeil. It's not 10 billion that the bank could create themselves through credits, their credit business. No, these are 10 billion euros, which this bank has at the European Central Bank as a balance. It's all quite complicated, but in the end, the bank will take funds from the European Central Bank, transfer it to Lars Klingbeil, who is then able to spend the money, and that money, if it's spent, then gets to our accounts. And the important message is, it's not the case that 500 billion were taken somewhere to put them somewhere. With this, after these sadly 12 years, these 500 billion plus X are additional funds that are now in the economic cycle. You can break it down and imagine how much you would get yourself from that. And then you'd realize, we have a distribution problem here. What arrives at us individually, well, that's a difficult question, but these are 500 billion that Lars Klingbeil, through the detour via the commercial banks, the kind of auction, ultimately got from the European Central Bank, and they create this money from thin air, out of thin air. Is that a good thing? The population, which in the past always very skeptical about new credit, new debt, that is. They're always saying the state should be very careful with our tax money. The state should act like a South German housewife who's very thrifty about funds. Now, these surveys are very interesting. 78% in the German nationwide surveys said, yes, we need more money for infrastructure, and 59% agreed that creating debt or creating this money from debt is a good thing. So the conservative public, well, this is a really good result, and the people are right. And there are various reasons for that. The first is that our economy is in crisis, which you often hear, but to put it into a picture, here we see since 2010 how the German economy has grown. Now, the dotted line is the trend from 2010 to 2019, so until before Corona, and the red line is the actual development. You can see this kind of slop here, the kind of drop. And the difference between the red line and the gray line is how much more income and wealth would we have if the economy had continued to grow as it did before the crisis. You'd have to kind of calculate the area, and math nerds know this is an integral. The number that will result is more than 1 trillion. And this is more than 1 trillion euros that, as potential income, has been denied to us. So that would be 1 trillion euro that we could have distributed amongst us. Against these 1 trillion euro of lost income, of not realized wealth, we are currently fighting with 50 divided by 12, 500 by 12, just over 40 billion per year. That is good. But regarding the gap that we need to fill, more would be possible. I'm going to say that quite diplomatically. And sorry, a few charts now that we have to get through. Then it is the case that in Germany, we've had a lack of investments for 30 years. Just look at this gray line, and you see that from 1996, it's at zero. And this is net investment, which is how much do I build in terms of new bridge minus the loss of value in existing bridges. And if this is positives, the infrastructure is going to rise in value. It's going to be more beautiful, larger, whatever. If it's negative or zero, the value will stay the same, or there will be some value lost. And I was born in 1996, so this chart is telling me since I was born, the value of public infrastructure has not improved. Thank you for that. And that also shows why it's actually so necessary to invest more. In the early 70s and 80s, we had investment of 20-30%. So 2 or 3%. To reach that level, we would have to spend 150 billion more every year. We're talking about 42, which are then shuffled around and made smaller that way. So if you're afraid of this figure, 500 billion, you should be afraid that this figure isn't large enough, not that it's too large, just because it has so many trailing zeros. And with these 500 billion, 100 billion is spent on German states and municipalities. But 41% of all public investment is not decided by the federal level, but by the cities, the municipalities. 41%, almost half of all public investment is at that level. And if it's about building, it's even 60%. So how much do they actually get from that special fund? Just 20% of these 500 billion? So municipalities are having to shoulder 60% of building investment, but only will receive 20%. So I have to criticize the Greens, sadly, for that. It would have been nice if in these negotiations, when Friedrich Merz needed their votes, that they should have called for this and give the cities and municipalities much more. That would have been much better than taking 100 billion out of that money and put 100 billion into a transformation fund for the climate, only to have Lars Klingbeil now covering part of his regular budget through the special fund. And if Friedrich Merz and Lars Klingbeil and the previous finance minister Lindner would be on the stage, they would say, well, this is not public investment, it's about private investment. Even Klaus Klingbeil, the Social Democrat, Lars Klingbeil says that too. We don't want a socialist economy. It is all about private investment, they would say. Okay, let's compare with France and the US. They have made much more debts during crisis times, state debt that is. They've stimulated the economy, and their private investment is 20% or 22% in the case of the US, 18 in the case of France, above the 2019 level, while we are still at the level of 2019. A very simple calculation.
So the economy is struggling, the MNCs are not going to spend any money, so the state really has to pick up the slack and fund investment. Whereas on the other hand, if the companies have a full order book and they need to invest in order to supply what they just sold, and it's not feasible to just say, as our chancellor does, yeah, but it's all about the private companies. So this leads to the exact result that you see here, that is rather dismal if you compare it to France or the US. So great that we have this now, because there's a huge backlog of investment, and it's about 60 trillion, I think. And the workers' associations and the representation for the private companies got together and did a little calculation what we need to do and invest in order to reach a level that would be necessary for the future. Not even that, just reducing the backlog. And they reached the conclusion of about 600 billion. So it's reasonable, the amount that they projected for the fund, but it's not quite good enough and definitely not future-proof. So obviously the debt brake and also the EU level rules around government deficit were kind of wrong, and they're kind of blind to that, what is important. And this is a big sentence, because clearly different people and different organizations, especially parties, have different interests that need to be done. And for example, some people want that the trains are coming on time, that you have good coverage for your mobile, that you can drive a car, all of that. And the debt brake was clearly in the way of the insight that we need to spend more for defense with regards to Putin and Trump. Even with the 2% expenditure that NATO rules demand from us, was already a tough goal to reach. Even right now, we're nowhere near that goal. We've already been accounting for things that technically shouldn't be part of that goal, and we haven't even reached that. So now the result is that instead of the 50 billion that we projected so far, we need to go to 80 or 90 billion just for the defense budget. And that means that, obviously, again, for all of the good things like climate protection, for infrastructure, a country where no child has to suffer from hunger or anything, there is not enough money, clearly. The debt brake is a political rule, first and foremost. We made that up. It's the same as we invented our monetary system. Money is a human invention. It's stupid because we clearly don't understand it well. It's the same as if you would drive, you seat yourself in your Porsche, put into the first gear, and then you're not going anywhere and you're complaining. And that's similar to what we're doing now. And clearly, if we want money for things that are important for us, we can create it out of thin air. The finance minister has measures that he can take, like selling government bonds in order to collect that money if he needs it. And we have this very strong distinction between new money is good, but it's only for investment, not for consumption. And behind that logic, We see, for example, having nicer toilets for students would be nice, but investment into teachers, for example, is a much better investment for the educational outcome of our students. Is a company that produces ammunition really an investment? You get grenades, for example, or rockets, and you're going to put them into storage, and then the question is, are you going to need it? Then you have to ask the question, is it going to be gone? Is that the same as a strawberry that you plant, you pick, and then eat it, and it's gone? Or the difference is that clearly you also destroy something on the way of consuming it. So we're lying to ourselves when we're saying this is an investment in our defense, and this is an investment. This is a completely arbitrary distinction. In investing into teachers, into good public services, into infrastructure, into, for example, equipment for the tax authorities, and these are technically funds that are spent on personnel, but they're also an investment into a functioning society. And then we have to learn, we'll see this over the next few years, that the economic cycle will pick up. There will be a growth in the economy, and we then will realize a debt itself is not bad intrinsically. There's a real layer. Even our Chancellor Friedrich Merz will say, okay, we're going to create more debt, but we're then able to defend ourselves. We could also say we're going to create more debt even and protect the climate, have better infrastructure, are independent of gas imports from Russia and thus Vladimir Putin. There's all a real aspect to this. And we could also say we could have more modern schools. And there's another layer that we haven't talked about, and that's a purely financial one. The debt that we're creating now has to be paid back by our successors, our children. And this is the clock that usually is shown when you're talking about this topic. It's taking away the money that we're creating as debt. It says 2.5 trillion euros, and it's usually framed as a burden. So this is the money that has been created by the government, by the state, and has been spent by the finance ministers of the last few decades. And it was invested into the companies of Germany, into our bank accounts, and it hasn't found its way back to the state and its budget. If you want to get this clock back to zero, I'm the government now, and you're the people, and I would need to collect this amount of money, these 2.5 trillion euros, and make you poorer in order to set this to zero. And people who say they want to lose all the debt, that basically means they want to make the populace poorer. And they're usually projecting themselves in talk shows as the ones who don't want to create debt, who don't want to take out loans, the frugal housewife of the nation, and they want to do something good for the populace. But that is not true. If we have this clock, say 3 billion after the transformation fund is taken into account, that is a little bigger problem, but it just means that we have produced wealth within our country, and it can also be passed on to the next generation. So the generation after us not just gets more money when they inherit it from their parents, but they also get a greener, safer, more protected economy in the future. And this is especially important since there's a rapid process of aging of the German populace, and a lot of boomers are going to go into retirement soon. And Lars Klingbeil is obviously opposed to this because he thinks that people have to work longer and retirement should start later. But that clearly means that there is going to be a smaller amount of the population that will work, whereas there's a bigger amount of people in retirement. And if this is a smaller amount of people that need to take care of the elderly, that need to protect the environment, that need to strengthen the infrastructure, that also, this is the worst thing, that the old people who pass on that infrastructure to younger generations, it's the worst thing that they can do, because there are so few of them. And the opposite is what we actually should be doing, because there are fewer people in the future. We should have done this yesterday. We should have done this in 1996 when I was born, and we could already see this drop in the birth rate. And we should have spent that money, so we don't have to try to catch up now. And it's just the bare minimum that we're doing. It's still not enough. And despite all of this, I want to end on a high note, because clearly, behind all of this, we have this message. Whatever is important to us, or let's say what is important to the elected government, is something that we can actually afford. So that means if we can afford to build fighter jets and build grenades, the same would be true for solar panels, for batteries, for anything that helps for fighting the climate problem. And if there's one thing you take away from this talk, money isn't scarce. It is whatever we want to afford, we can afford. Thank you.